Hello world, I'm your shorter than average girl from down under, and happy holidays to all! To celebrate the festivities, we're going to look at a Christmas classic, A Christmas Carol. This story by Charles Dickens changed Christmas forever. And although I myself don't celebrate Christmas, I celebrate the story and all it represents, which by extension means I celebrate the essence of Christmas, because the story basically shaped the way that people view and value Christmas today. Now, in terms of a movie, A Christmas Carol has been adapted to the big screen more than a dozen times, each having like a different twist to it or a different take. Some are adult-oriented, focusing more on the philosophy and the social ideas presented in the story, whereas some are kid-oriented, which focus more on the message of being a good and selfless person. Each iteration focuses on a different thing that we can take away from the original story. For the purposes of this video, we'll be looking at the actual book and the 2009 Disney adaptation of the novella, which, although isn't the greatest movie in the world, is the most faithful animated adaptation of the story, with the characters basically being shown exactly how they're described in the book, and all the scary commentary actually being scary in this movie. And it doesn't really help that the animation just adds this entire uncanny effect to the movie. But anyhow, if you're only here for the book or the movie review, then you can skip to the time shown on the screen right now, or the timestamp in the description, whichever suits you best. But for now, let's talk stories. This is a story about a man named Ebenezer Scrooge, a horrible old banker who cares about nothing but money in the world. As the world is preparing for Christmas, Scrooge ain't having any of the festivities, responding
humbug
to his nephew's Christmas dinner invitation and refusing to contribute to charity, saying that the poor might as well be dead than live their miserable life, or get rich. Yeah, Ebenezer ain't be doing well in 2024. He'd be cancelled straight away. On the night of Christmas Eve, the ghost of his late business partner, Jacob Marley, comes to him, sad, anguished, and held down by these heavy chains. Marley tells Scrooge that this is his fate because of his greedy and self-serving lifestyle, and that Scrooge's fate's gonna be way worse because he's lived on this earth for longer. But Scrooge is still alive, and so he can make changes. Marley tells Scrooge that 3 ghosts will be visiting him over the next 3 nights. And after this harrowing encounter, well, Scrooge passes out and wakes up to the spirit of a little boy with a glowing face, the ghost of Christmas past. This spirit shows Scrooge's childhood, his sad boarding school days, and his exciting apprenticeship, as well as his engagement to his sweetheart Bella, which eventually fell apart due to his love for money. Regretting his choices, Scrooge returns to his bed, and this is when he meets a giant man in green robes, the ghost of Christmas Present. This spirit shows Scrooge what people are doing on Christmas Eve. He takes him to the home of his overworked and underpaid clerk, Bob Cratchit, and he finds out that poor Cratchit has a crippled son, Tiny Tim, a son that...
Tiny Tim. I see a vacant seat in the poor chimney corner, and a crutch without an owner, carefully preserved.
The spirit then takes Scrooge to his nephew's dinner party, where he learns about how his family actually thinks of him. But as he was feeling bad about what his family thinks of him and all the things that he's missing out on, Scrooge realizes that the spirit was growing older, and from underneath his robe there were these 2 poor and impoverished children, Ignorance and Want. The spirit warns Scrooge of these 2 before succumbing to his age, and that's when he notices a hooded figure coming towards him. The ghost of Christmas yet to come. This was the visitor that Scrooge feared the most. He's showing these businessmen discussing the wealth of a recently passed man, a poor couple celebrating the death of this man whilst another couple had robbed him. The phantom shows Scrooge a body, but Scrooge refuses to look at it before he sees someone who was sad about the death of this person. So he's taken to the Cratchits. Poor Tiny Tim had passed, and here Scrooge is shown how real love and real grief looks like. He finally has the courage to find out the identity of the deceased, and lo and behold, he begs the ghost to change his fate, promising to make positive changes in his life, only to find himself in his bed again, waking up on Christmas Day. And from that day on, Scrooge changed his ways, being more giving, cheery, visiting his family, and increasing Mr. Cratchit's wage. He even personally looked after Tiny Tim, being like a second father for him, meaning that Tiny Tim had many, many years to live yet. And that was the end of that. Now, the lessons of A Christmas Carol are simple: to cherish people over materialism, to be generous and helpful over stingy and selfish. But I don't think that just summarizing it in that way does justice to the overwhelming impact the story has had on our society. The way of life that the people had when the story was published was very different to the lives that we have today. So these words were actually revolutionary at the time for many of the rich people of Victorian society, which also impacted the poor in very positive ways. Victorian England saw the rich being filthy rich and the poor being very, very poor. Every man, woman, or child who wasn't in the upper class of society was in debtors' prisons or in factories. There was no childhood, no innocence. So religion is what the poor turn to for hope, which in itself is another industry to leech off the gullible and the optimistic. Whilst the greatest minds of Victorian society were debating the fundamentals of theology, conservative evangelical doctrines were becoming more popular amongst the poor. And like Puritan England, where Christian was forbidden, many of the traditions of modern Christmas weren't practiced for their overt materialistic and paganistic natures. It was Charles Dickens who introduced the notion of Christmas being a day to celebrate family and act charitably. And he introduced a myriad of new traditions that we now use in Christmas through A Christmas Carol. Things like taking a day off on Christmas, a Christmas roast, giving Christmas cards, giving charity, and caroling, all things that weren't practiced before. Essentially, Dickens united the two classes by flipping the script, guilting the rich to give up their riches willingly through charity and giving their workers a day off, and allowing the poor to celebrate without feeling that it's materialistic and unchristian. As long as they don't feed ignorance and want, everyone is free from the potential evil of indulging in the Christmas ways. A lesson which may need to be shared with all the Christmas TikTokers. Anyways, I don't think we should be too surprised with Charles Dickens' direction with A Christmas Carol. I mean, ever since he was 11 years old, his parents were in a position where he needed to work in a boot factory, and this changed him. He made it his mission to talk about the socio-economic state of Victorian society through his literary work. A Christmas Carol is no exception to that. This book was made to highlight the behaviors of the elite as vile and inhumane, regardless if they were religious or not, and using the eternity and divinity associated with Christmas to frame this social issue made it appear less as an opinion but more objective. Dickens was casting his judgment upon the rich elite, and the majority agreed. Using ghosts was a genius play by Dickens. as well as to cast fair and justice. Now, Dickens himself didn't actually believe in ghosts, but he was fascinated in people's belief in them, to the extent that he joined the Ghost Club in London. That is, if AC Syndicate has taught me anything.
I joined the Ghost Club, the first society in the world to look systematically at the phenomenon.
Sounds absolutely ridiculous.
Industrial England was one on the cusp of the transition between the magical and the scientific, which called to question many strong-held beliefs that science couldn't yet explain. With every step away from religion, there was more of an increased fear of the occult, and a fear of what is true and what is not. Exploiting this cardinal fear and theoretical uncertainty only made the message of doing wrong more potent for his readers, enhancing the impact of the story on Victorian society. And Dickens wasn't shy of using symbolism in his ghost designs. Like the Ghost of Christmas Past was a child to represent the innocence of childhood that's being taken away. And when that moment comes where innocence is lost, the child's face stops shining and it burns out, showing that at that one point of time when the child loses their innocence, they have to move on quickly without being given the opportunity to relish or regret what has passed. As for the Ghost of Christmas Present, well, he ages quickly because the present is short-lived. It's only in the now, and so he can only survive in the now, meaning that he will always have a very short life. But the present is joyous, no matter what, because the fact that you're alive in this situation means that it's good, regardless, and that's why he's a giant and jolly chap. Without the proper use of the present, then its energy is going to be leached away by two other sources, ignorance and want. If you don't use the present to increase your understanding, then all you're doing is moving into the future with less information and knowledge. And if you end up using your present only to benefit your future or to collect, then all you're benefiting is your want. Both things are going to sap the joy from the moment. And finally, the ghost of Christmas yet to come. This is the Grim Reaper, the thing that we are most afraid of. The future, it looms ahead of us. We have anxiety trying to think about what we need to do and how things are going to work out, because the only thing certain for us in the future is death. And after death, well, then we go into a whole commotion of uncertainty afterwards, and that is scary. But basically, each ghost represents what Scrooge, and us by extension, miss out on at each point of time. In our past, we try to grow up so quickly, missing out on our innocence and snuffing it as quickly as we possibly can. In the present, we miss out on the joy because we're constantly either thinking about the past or the future, that we're basically collecting ignorance and want rather than focusing on the joy. And as for the future, where do I get started on the future? We lose a lot of time thinking about it, and we're constantly afraid of it, when we really should be taking each step at a time, being joyous and giving all that we can in the moment. That's how we can guarantee that our future will be happy. And that's what Charles Dickens teaches us through A Christmas Carol. We shouldn't lose our innocence, or forego the present, or forget the inevitable future. Scrooge realized that he had no happiness, no connection, and therefore no value, leaving no mark in this world because of his ways. His existence was essentially a burden on others, but by changing it, he became happy, connected, and valuable. He left a great mark on the world, even allowing a child to live on beyond the years that were given to him, making Scrooge no longer a burden on the world. Now, I know that Charles Dickens isn't everyone's cup of tea because of how difficult Victorian English is, but A Christmas Carol, I think that should be an exception because it's really short and its lessons are valuable. In a world where the real meaning of this holiday has been replaced by consumerism. Like, regardless if you even believe that this was the day that Christ was born or not, the lessons taught in A Christmas Carol really do need to be reinforced. Now, the story itself, it's not the easiest read, and it does have scary elements in it, which are 100% reflected in this movie. And yeah, when I watched this movie, it was definitely not what I expected from a Disney movie, but it was pretty faithful to the source material, and that's worth a shot. I hope you will have a lovely and happy holiday, guys. That was A Christmas Carol by Charles Dickens, a story about the importance of spreading cheer and joy throughout the holiday season, which can be extended to throughout the year. It has been a lovely year to share with you all, and I really hope to catch you again in 2025. I'm really grateful for the small community that we've cultivated here, and I really hope that you've enjoyed it too. So be brave, be happy, and be kind, and I really hope that I'll catch you all next time.